Okay, let's start. Well, people might still be joining us here. I want to make sure we get them in the waiting room. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I'd like to, I'm George Potanovic. I'd like to welcome you to this this meeting to discuss the town's plans to sell what is really our largest asset, the Letchworth property, almost 30 acres of land, with what we consider to be very little information and very little advance notice on the details of that plan. If anyone has been following this, we know there's an MOU or a memorandum of understanding that the town has developed, which we've noticed has many inconsistencies within it. It's not a contract. It's not something that's definite. It's subject to change. And personally, I'm very concerned about the idea of selling a piece of town property without knowing the answers to many of the unanswered questions. So the purpose of this meeting is to give us a chance to go over what we know, what we don't know, and hopefully we can all participate in this town meeting that's being scheduled for Wednesday at the Patriot Hills Club at 7 o'clock. And come to that meeting with some good questions and expect answers to those questions.
George,
I'd like to, go ahead.
Before we start, I'm glad that Rick Tannenbaum is here. He knows a lot about it, but okay. We're trying to get our act together. And if Rick wants, my suggestion, if Rick wants to talk about, he's representing the developer. If he wants to talk about it, we can ask questions, but I think we need to have a meeting among us who without Rick being here.
Okay, so we have a representative from,
from the
developer. Yeah. Okay.
What is Rick's position with the developer? He's
Wait,
their
hold
attorney?
on. Let me just put my screen on. Hold on 1 second. Can everybody see me?
Yeah, Rick, we can see you. That's fine.
Hi, everybody. So I thought I could be helpful. So I thought, I had heard, unanswered questions. I thought that I could maybe fill in some of the blanks where I can. I'm familiar with the project. I'm familiar with everything about it. But
what is your relationship to the buyer?
I am a consultant and advisor to the buyer.
Contract.
Have you ever worked for the town?
For the town of Stony Point? No.
Have you worked for the buyer before?
So my firm has a relationship with the buyer for many years. We've done many other projects with him, dating back quite a few years, mostly in Westchester and other counties. This is our first Rockland County project.
And is your company, you have a company then that consults on an independent consulting basis with the contractor, with the builder?
Yes. Well,
are you paid on a contingency basis or a fixed fee basis?
Why does any of that matter?
It matters to me because it changes your objective.
Excuse me. It's okay. He's welcome on the call.
Kraus. I'm here. I've read a lot of this stuff. Can we go forward with the meeting? We don't need
let's go ahead.
Examination.
Rick, you're welcome on the call. It's fine.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, I think Greg's issue is whether this is the right venue for Rick to be involved in, or if his venue is more.
Listen,
it's okay, but we don't need examination.
George, I think
we know he represents the potential buyer. We can say yes or no based on that, not whether he's compensated any specific way.
Yes.
He has not denied that he works for the buyer, and we can decide whether he wants somebody in that situation, that position present, period.
And if we have things to discuss offline at some point, if we decide certain actions we want to take, we can certainly hold those for a future time. So let's at least get into the subject. And Rick, you're welcome on the call. It's fine. Okay. Pete, do you want to start with some of the questions that you had? I guess my issues have to do with the short amount of time that we have really from this public meeting, which is just set up without any notice, advance notice really to the newspapers, to any kind of media outside of being on the radio. The supervisor was on the radio Thursday morning. I heard it and I recorded it and sent it out. But that's not the way to announce, in my view, to announce a meeting of this importance less than a week before the meeting is going to happen. So I'm concerned about that. And all along in this process, There's been a lack of notification. Even when Hudson Park did the initial presentation back in May, there was literally one day's notice in advance of such an important meeting. So the problem we're having is the town really doesn't want the public to understand this. Otherwise, they'd go to the effort of letting us know more in advance and plan this more in advance and not wait till literally the last minute to have a meeting before a vote. But Pete, why don't you go over some of the things that we discussed earlier, and we can at least throw out some of the questions that we have.
Sure. I'm just going to share my screen.
Okay.
So this is the best kept secret in Stony Point, is the way I've said, is that it's the largest housing development, I believe, that Stony Point has ever had. And it is going kind of slipping in onto the radar. You don't hear people discussing it. People aren't clear about what it's all about. For me, taking it at a high level, I ask myself, is this having all these this kind of housing project of this size what Stony Point really needs? And it's not affordable housing from what we've heard in the original presentation. The units are going for 500,000 and up. And Rick, I'm going to ask that you not wait till the end before answering questions.
Let's hold off until we on questions until we get into the subject.
So one of the things that's happened since the first presentation is that the actual project has changed. Originally, this was the project, and since that time, on the new web page, we find that the number of condo flats has gone up. The townhomes haven't changed. The senior assisted units haven't changed. But the multifamily units have been reduced by 105 units, just so we know. The interesting thing about that is that this all happened without any notice to the public. So the project has actually changed, and this is the way the town has been operating with the developer. It's like, where are we? Are we at 550 units? Are we at 460 units? And who decided, and how did this all happen? When we talk about this, there's a lot of questions that come up because we don't have a lot of information. So I'm going to just start with some basic. What are the price range of the units? And this is for probably Wednesday, the kinds of questions we'll ask. Are the amenities for unit purchasers only? A lot of people online that are just hearing about this are asking about that. How many parking spots are planned? How many people do you estimate will be living there when it's fully built? What's the difference between a townhome and a multifamily home, which is somehow broken out in the project? Questions I have are, what are the senior assisted independent units? And Dave Evangelista has brought up that those generally are leased or rented. Who will be running that center, that this independent 170 units of independent and assisted living? Will you be seeking any tax abatements like pilot agreements and so on? How much traffic does the developer estimate this will project onto our local roads? What's the estimate of the number of children that'll be living in this community, because that'll affect our schools? Have you done any marketing research study on the ability to sell out these units at these prices in Stony Point? So is there any marketing that this will actually be a successful project and not be something that gets halted in phase 1 or phase 2 and it gets sold off because it's not profitable? Where do you see the majority of the purchasers coming from? In Stony Point, if the units are priced the way it was mentioned in the original presentation, at $500,000 to $800,000 or $750,000. So not the typical Stony Pointer. Have you had a multi-phase project that was not completed? So these are just some of the basic questions just for the developer. I will say that George said this is a town meeting on Wednesday. It is not a town meeting. It is a developers meeting. We need questions for the town that the developer can't answer. Questions about sewers, infrastructure, schools, etc. Those are questions for the town. The developer can't answer those types of questions. And so the town owes us an official public meeting to answer some of the questions that are not here right now. So I'll turn it over to George and to David to take it from there.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, these are all important questions. And as you said, you know, the town should be representing the public's interest as well, which could be very different than the developer's interest. So we hope that the town would hopefully hold a meeting the same way, but they've never announced anything. There is a town meeting on Tuesday, prior to the day before, prior to this meeting, but there's been nothing officially stated in terms of the town making any kind of a presentation on the subject. Dave, you had some issues you wanted to speak about as well. Would you like to start with those now?
I can. I mean, my biggest concern, and as I said, even back earlier this year when the builder was there, the concept of the project makes some sense. I think the issues a lot of people have are, number one, people up to this point had no idea it was even happening or up for a vote. Number two, where just over a month away from the election, we have less information available to the public this year on the scope of the project, the details of the project, than we even had last year when we were selling the entire parcel, 130 give or take acres. Now we're selling 30 acres and we have less information. And I think people don't have a good understanding of what's going on. So just to give you a brief overview, the town board came to the MOU, this memorandum of understanding with the builder, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And the board authorized the supervisor to sign this in August, and it was signed. And they did it by a resolution. They also made the resolution to put on the ballot this referendum. The referendum is not actually to yes or no sell the property. The wording of the ballot referendum is simply, shall the town board resolution authorizing the sale of plus or minus 31.2 acres of town property within the former Letchworth property be approved? Well, they're asking for approval on documents that are not done, on terms and conditions that are not negotiated. The MOU even contains a clause that the scope of the project doesn't have to fully be disclosed to the town by the builder until 120 days after the execution of the MOU. That was on August 22nd. So they have until December 22nd to finalize the scope of the project. And that's before any contracts and negotiations with the town occur. The resolution the town board signs allows, once this referendum is approved, says that the board and the supervisor can unilaterally continue the process, negotiate the deal, negotiate the terms and conditions, sign the contract, and sell the property with, basically, it doesn't mandate any further disclosure to the people of the town of Stony Point on any of those items, any of the terms and conditions that will be final. So that's a little bit of a problem. And when asked in public, the supervisor on behalf of the board said, well, we don't know if there's going to be any more public hearings after the vote, right? One of the things I asked for was putting together a town-wide committee to at least look over the terms and conditions and the scope of the project after if the ballot referendum was approved. The other thing I have a problem with, and we'll talk about that a little more in a bit, is we're talking about all these units, somewhere of 465 units, some with assisted living, which are going to be staff. You're going to have staff coming in and out. You're going to have all these residents. There are limited facilities in the scope of the project, a coffee shop and something like that for the residents, but there's no retail services. So anyone who needs any little thing, convenience store, haircut, beauty salon, dry cleaning, they're going to have to get on the road and they're going to have to go somewhere. And this project contains no even limited retail. For that western part of the town, it has no retail. My other problem with it is last year we saw, when we finally got all the documents, how bad the documents were. And there's no indication that these documents this year will be any better in terms of protecting the town. In fact, the MOU already has errors that would technically make it deficient because it has paragraphs that refer to paragraphs that don't exist. But with that said, it also contains an offset clause, and this is my other concern. We pull out of the air 3.1 million for this 30 acres. That's conveniently the same revenue that the town tried to get last year for the 130 acres. So, okay, 3.1. When a builder buys property, the builder knows what they're buying, and the builder incurs costs. In this case, the builder's agreeing to do about 5 other items to do things for the town in return for getting this contract. But what people don't understand is after they list the 5 items in paragraph 4, there's a paragraph 5 that says, yeah, but for 3 of those items, we're giving the builder a cap. And if the builder spends more than $2.1 million, he can come back and we can negotiate. Remember, this is the town board with no public input, can come back and negotiate an offset to the 3.1 million for the amount he spent in excess of the 2.1 million. And the $2.1 million cap is renovating Kirkbride, constructing the town recreation center. And again, one of the deficits last time was there was no interior. It was just the structure we were getting with no interior. We'd have to make sure that's negotiated properly. And the third item is moving and reconfiguring the 2 golf holes. One's being reconfigured, one's being moved. I could see very easily the builder spending more than $2.1 million if all that is done right. So let's presume the builder spends $5.2 million on those projects somehow. Comes back and says, I got to spend 5.2 to do what you want. You said I only had to spend 2.1. I'd like a $3 million offset. Well, $3.1 million sale price with a $3 million offset means the town would only get $100,000 net on the deal.
Right.
And we would still bear,
after the fact.
and we would still bear all the costs that Pete inferred about infrastructure, operational, things that go into the town budget,
Potential
the county
police,
budget, right? The county
police.
budget, the school district budget. So I have some concerns already on the surface of the MOU, not to mention the deficiency in the reference of the paragraphs. And now we're going to go to a contract. And last year's contracts were so bad with so little protection for the town. And the board, specifically the supervisor, has said no to all offers from community people on a gratis basis, offering to help people who do deals, people who do contracts, saying, no, we don't need any help. We screwed it up last time. We'll screw it up again, possibly, but we don't want anyone's help. We don't want to tell anyone anything. So those are kind of my concerns in a nutshell.
Yeah, Dave, do you want to talk to specific parts of the MOU, or I have it up on the screen? I think if everybody can see
this is paragraph 4. So if you look at A, if you scroll through A,
right,
that's the renovation of Kirkbride, and you scroll through B, the recreation center, right? Yep. And you see there's nothing in there about it being finished in the interior, and we've always heard so far it's going to be a prefab constructed building. Skip C. C is not included in this clause. D is the replacement hole and the reconfiguration. So this is the reconfiguration of the hole that runs alongside the pond. At the end of it, it's going to be reconfigured and moved to the right, from my understanding. And then hole 17, which is right behind Row Hall. If you've ever looked out the back windows of where you go to vote in Row Hall, that hole is going to be moved to another location because that property is part of the deal. So those 3 paragraphs, A, B, and D, are covered in paragraph 5, I believe, because the cross-reference is wrong, because there is no paragraphs for small a, small b, and for D above. My presumption is, and there's nothing in parens above, my presumption is it was meant to say for large letter A, for large letter B, and for large letter D. But again, that's a fault in the drafting. However, this, as you read this, says if the cost of those 3 items exceed 2.1, that the town and the Hudson, this is, remember now, after the fact, no more public input, they may just agree to a reduction of the purchase price in consideration of the estimated cost of these projects. That is vague.
Yes.
It's unknown, and it gives too much latitude to the supervisor, because the board in one of the referendums, resolutions, granted the supervisor to take care of all this. So it rests in one person to make the decision right now, according to the documents, as to what this offset would be.
Would this be a good time for me to speak up, or?
Well, I would like to make a comment before you continue. With
Rick, let's let the people that are on the call talk. You'll be given some time.
Yeah, I read this the same way as Dave did, Jim Krause. And given inflation and the cost of construction and the cost of planning these type of renovations, it's A, B, D. There's no way in the world that these things are not going to exceed 2.1 million. I mean, that's a sneeze compared to what these things will cost. And the result will be, yes, that the total price will be abated for what the town receives. And in a general concern, it seems to me that the amount of money that the town is getting for this project is ridiculously low. The
Yes.
Rockland County Business Journal just this week had a Spring Valley purchase of $4 million for 1.76 acres of that housing would be built on. And this was in Spring Valley. And so we're talking less than 2 acres at $4 million, and we're talking approximately 31 acres. I understand that these other projects are pertinent, but at 2.1 million for these other projects, there's no way that essentially this builder is going to get this land for perhaps even a zero input into the purchase of the property. And to me, that's one of the concerns. The town is simply we are not getting enough payment for all this acreage.
For the asset.
And then, and all these side issues about the burden on the sewer, the pollution from the cars, the density of this project.
Yeah, density.
As now described, those are my concerns.
Can I have 2 more minutes, George, to piggyback on
Sure,
what
go right
Tim
ahead,
just did?
Dave.
Because I actually forgot
And then
one
if,
thing.
and if I can, I would like to weigh in on some of the things before we
I'll give
lose
you some
lose
time,
track of all
Rick,
these
but
different
let the
items.
people. I'd like the people on the call talk first.
I'd like
Sure,
to
go
say,
ahead.
Hold on one second.
I'd like to say
Bill.
something just briefly. I was involved in the last joke of a contract. This is another Swiss cheese contract, which puts a group of people in charge that none of us trust.
That's right.
And why are we even, I mean, I thank David, he did a very good job. Pete's done a great job alerting us, but this is another contract that's really not a contract.
No.
It's not a viable contract that any company would go into.
And Bill, thank you for pointing that out, because the most important thing, and I pointed this out before, the difference between this year and last year, we actually don't even have a contract right now, right? So a year ago, we actually had a contract. Now we don't even have a contract. So I appreciate you pointing that out. So not only does it have holes, it's got a big hole, right?
It's missing.
Well, it puts a group of people that nobody trusts, or at least in a large group of people, because I was out campaigning for the last thing, people would come up to me, Republicans, Democrats, whoever they are, and go, Christ, no, I wouldn't trust them.
Yeah. Well, let me point out.
This is another craziness.
Yeah. Let me point out the 2 things I missed, tying into what Jim said, and then I'll let everyone else have their time. I just want to refresh everyone's memory too, because there's been this big red herring all along about the cost of abatement, cost of asbestos abatement, right? I just want to refresh people's memory. Of the 7 or 8 buildings we're talking about here, and one of them is Kirkbride, 4 of those buildings have been abated. I mean, I hope they've been abated because A, they were in the original bond when we bought the property and rehab, and we're putting people in the buildings, right? So I'm making the assumption that these buildings are mostly abated or at least contained. So Kirkbride, which we're going to retain, right, was already abated if it needed it. The court building was abated in the original project. Row Hall was abated in the original project, and the cooperative extension building was abated in the original contract. Those were all in that bond. So you remember a year ago, they were talking about the bond and the debt, and the golf course couldn't pay the debt. No one failed to realize that that debt included the abatement and renovation of these 4 buildings at the time we bought the property, right? They just put it on the golf course. But now you got to remember, 3 of the buildings he's demolishing are already abated. So this whole red herring of how much this cost of abatement, it's nowhere near these numbers that people are throwing out. That's my first comment. The second comment is, even with the revised numbers that Pete gave us on the scope of the project, it's still 15.5 units per acre. And that doesn't count things that are environmentally protected. We believe there's still some environmentally protected areas, but at the least, it's 15.5 units per acre. I just want to point out revenue. So we've already heard prices from 400, 450 up to 750 or 800. Just so you get a scope of, we may get something less than 3.1. The builder just on the 295 units, I'm assuming the multifamily are going to be sold with the townhouses and the condo. At $400,000 a unit, that's 118 million. At $500,000 a unit, that's 147 million. At $750 a unit, that's $221 million. He would then still be in possession of the 170 assisted living and independent living buildings. They have to be operated. They have to be managed. I don't know if this builder is in that business. I don't think so. He would have to either maintain it and lease it to somebody, so he would have all the residual lease payments on those buildings, or the rent on those units, on those 170 units, or he would sell that building. Those two buildings would then be sold, or one connected building, to somebody else for another $100 million, or some figure. I'm guessing at that part. So the scope of the revenue on this project is so massive. I'm not quite sure why we have to guarantee his building costs. And that's part of my other concern. So now I'm done for the moment. Thank you for the time, George and Pete.
Yeah, great. Is there anyone else who is from the public that would like to ask a question or make a comment at this point?
Is this a good time?
Can I,
I have a
Rick,
question.
I'll give you some time, Rick. Just hold on. Go ahead.
I have a question about the assisted living. What assisted living has to be approved by the state health department. It's a certified site. It needs to go through a certificate of need process and has to be built towards certain codes. What has been done in terms of reaching out to the New York State Health Department to determine whether or not they would even approve assisted living of that size in Rockland County?
That's a question for Wednesday night, Jackie.
Yes.
You know, we can't answer that. And
Right.
I'd like to hold Rick off because he's going to have a whole opportunity on Wednesday night to give the answers to all these questions that we're raising. Right now, we're just discussing roughly, you know, just where we are. And if it's okay, George, I just want to talk about one other thing.
Go ahead.
And that is from the highest level, do we really want to have 460 units built in our neighborhood? Is this
That's
what
right.
Stony Point needs?
Yeah.
I've said it a number of times. If you ask 100 Stony Pointers what this town needs, you won't get a single one that says we need 460 multifamily condos, townhouses,
High
in this
density
town.
housing. Yeah.
So what?
It's up to 20 units per acre.
And then people accuse us of saying we say no to everything. Well, I'd like to say that it's a vote no is actually a vote for stepping back and looking at the potential of this property. So I just want to talk about, there's a lot of Facebook chatter going on, and suddenly a lot of people that are hearing about this are saying we need a skating rink up there. We need walking paths, bike paths, other things, a mix of business.
Maybe
and
some businesses.
Business and park. So
maybe a hotel, like we've been talking about for how many years? Yeah.
Right. And it's all possible, but let me just share my screen and just show what the potential of the future is. Is that okay? Just for just for a minute or two.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm just going to share my
And
screen.
while you're getting that up, I just want to point out to everyone, thank you for coming to this today. And we hope this is the beginning of the process. We know where everyone's raising questions. That last question about state approval was great. We know there's the Wednesday night meeting. We hope there's going to be other opportunities between now and the election and the vote to vet some of these questions, get some of these answers. And I would hope that if it passes, and we were told no by the supervisor outright on this, but we would hope that after the election, there would be community input into the negotiation phase of the contract. Now that's worrisome.
I would doubt that. I would doubt that very much based on the past and how he's acted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the answer
where
Pete is going now after last year's vote, I know Pete and Greg and others approached the supervisor and said, let's get a committee together. Let's talk about these ideas that came out in the process. And everyone was told, no, we're not going to convene another committee. We're not going to generate more community input. We're going to do what we can do. And now we're left with another non-bid proposal that came out of nowhere that is being basically shoved down the voters' throat.
Exclusive, yeah.
Right, and there are people here willing to be involved, willing to share their time, willing to share their expertise. And the town board, the supervisor on behalf of the board has continuously said, no, I know what I'm doing. We're going to do it ourselves. So
Yes.
that kind of piggybacks on people. Let's talk about, there are things, there are examples throughout the country that what can be done with a property like this.
And for me, what's very frustrating, and just to say what Dave, just to tack on with Dave, is that there's a consistent feedback of we can't do it. Okay.
Right.
We've tried everything. Everybody walks away. This property is useless. It's valueless. And so therefore, the quicker we can get it off our hands, the better.
Right.
I believe we haven't tried everything, and I believe we can. And that's the attitude we need to go into anything we do with this property since we own it. But let's just talk about a couple of things. One possibility is we can remove a building or two per year on our own. And now how do we do that? How do we finance that? Right now in the budget, without touching or increasing the budget, there is a bond, the last bond, big bond payment for the golf course and the abatement that David mentioned. After that, if we leave that in place for 2 or 3 years, we could take down a building or two every year without touching our taxes. It would just be collecting the money that we've been collecting for the last few years, last 20 years. And we could take those buildings down. We could leave Row. We could leave Kirkbride. We could leave the, maintenance building. If we want to leave the town court, we can. It's up to us what we wanted to create up there. But we can take those buildings down ourselves without increasing our budget, without increasing our taxes. Or we could subdivide the lots into smaller lots. So this is a 29-acre property that now is being extended to 31 acres. But we could subdivide this. And a good example of what that would mean in terms of the future. Smaller lots, multiple buildings on lots or just smaller lots. Just imagine if the Hudson Mill restaurant down in Garnerville, it's in the Garner Arts Center. In order to open their restaurant, they had to buy the entire Garner Arts Center and renovate the whole Garner Arts Center. They would never have moved in. Even the Patriot Grill that's up there in the up there at the golf course right now, if they had to buy the entire property, the whole 30 acres to open their business, they never would have done it. So separating out into smaller lots gives us the opportunity of bringing in 1 or 2 small businesses that may be a hotel that's on a small lot that doesn't have to renovate 8 buildings and deal with all of the issues on the property. Also, we can create recreational facilities along with a hotel or along with some small businesses. So I've been hearing online, skating rink has been big.
Yes.
In Rockland County.
Rink. Yeah. Yeah.
And roller rinks. There's been a lot of different uses, and we could talk about a teen center up there. We could talk about an outdoor amphitheater. These are just thrown out there as examples. But this 30 acres of property is the last big chunk of property we have as a town. Right. And as our town grows, our quality of life is really at stake here with traffic, schools, and all of these other projects that are going in right now. Public space is going to actually have value and raise our property taxes.
That's right.
I mean, excuse me, raise our housing costs, not costs.
Our value.
Sorry, let's say exact opposite of what I want to say. So, it's my feeling that when we're not voting something down, we're voting for something. We're voting to keep this property, to do something good with it, and to give it a step back, talk with the community, and do something positive. This housing at this point is a total loser for us. Yeah. That's just my opinion. I'm not speaking for the Democrats, and I'm not speaking for anybody other than myself.
Can I just say, Pete, that's a terrific idea. Yeah. Just give me a second.
Go ahead.
The whole focus of that area is recreation. Golf course, camp venture, little league fields, soccer fields across the street. That is the focus of that area. Even the fact that Kirkbride and the meeting halls and that is the focus, and that should be expanded and retained And that is basically what you are advocating.
So put something in.
You know, and that's what it is.
And we're missing any kind of discussion
I'd really like
about that.
I'd like to speak. I know you've been going on for 40 minutes.
Rick,
If you're
I will
not gonna
give
let me
you,
speak, I'm just gonna click off.
I will give you some time to speak.
You know-
This is a
you know
meeting for
what?
the public
There
mainly.
are too many,
Okay,
there
I'm
are too many
allowing you,
topics
excuse
for me
me,
to
I'm
even
allowing you on the
cover them
town.
all. You said that.
I'm allowing you on the call. I don't want you taking over the meeting. You can wait until the people that are on this call are speaking first.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to say was, why are we using town-owned property for housing? You know, we know housing is all over the county. They're trying to build these 55 and over communities on private lands that are owned by developers that might have some rights to do that. But why are we taking town land where we can determine what the use of that property is and dedicating that towards housing? We have a lot of other opportunities that we really haven't discussed since the vote last year when this was turned down. We haven't had any kind of real reinvention of what we want there. I mean, housing is a limited use that comes along with a lot of expenses and maybe not many benefits for the people in this town.
Mhm.
Okay.
One of the things that I've been to other communities, South Carolina, Maryland, etc. One of the key things that raises their property values is, what am I going to do with my kids? What recreational facilities, in a short distance that I don't have to drive for an hour to put my kids into? It's all right in front of us, guys. Little league fields, soccer fields, trails to ride your bike on, anything like that is going to
businesses, I wouldn't be
increase
opposed
your
to.
property values. And that's what the bottom line is. I mean, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to deal with these people who are it's just a money grab.
Right, it's a real estate
Sorry
deal
to
is
say
what it
that,
is.
Rick.
Yeah.
I appreciate your job and I'm sure you're very good at it, but stop. I mean, really, we don't have to, like I said, reinvent the wheel. It's right in front of us.
Yeah, Greg,
Okay,
you want
do
to
you
have
want
something to say?
any
Go ahead.
answers at all? Do you want?
I
any
would like you
input,
to
or you
wait. I
just
would
wanna
like you to
go
wait
and
until.
on and
Yeah,
talk about
this
your
is our
side of
meeting.
things?
This is our meeting. We're letting you on the meeting. I'm not letting you take the meeting over. You can speak. I'm going to give you time. I did promise you that, but you please wait until other people have spoken. We have a public here that's going to be first. If he doesn't want to be on the call, that's fine.
I think he
Greg,
left, George. I think he left.
that's fine. He can leave. He was welcome to stay on and listen. At least he'll know what we're going to talk about on Wednesday. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I just wanted to point it out. I'm not a ventriloquist, but Rick was obviously moving his lips and talking to somebody while we were having this meeting. You got to, the analysis is spot on. What hasn't developed is a plan of action. And I really thought we have 31 days to the election, not counting pre-voting, early voting. Unless we're talking about a plan here, we're going to go down.
That's a good point, Greg, and hopefully we'll get a little bit to that, and we'll have to focus on that immediately after this meeting, and especially after Wednesday's meeting. But for all of you who joined today, the number one thing is tell everyone you know about this ballot referendum, because the number one thing we've seen so far is the people of the town of Stony Point don't even know this referendum exists. Then as you're talking to people, because we need to spread the word of mouth worked last time. Tell people some of these questions that have been raised. We don't have answers. We may never have answers, but at least let people understand there are questions. Encourage them to come Wednesday night. Encourage them to come. There will be follow-ups. Hopefully, as Greg says, we'll get a plan, and hopefully there'll be follow-ups to implement that plan. Have people pay attention. This is important to the residents of the town of Stony Point. They should have input. So the biggest thing you all today, taking your Saturday morning and joining us, is spread the word, because we need momentum and we need people to follow the issue. So Greg, but I think Greg's right on. And we have talked, Greg, Pete and George of us have talked about, we need to come up with that plan. And the problem is, you lived through it last year, mobilizing the plan, Greg. So you know the issues of getting the momentum of the plan in place.
Yeah, and I do want to encourage people to come on Wednesday. The town set this meeting up in my view, very haphazardly. Can you see the flyer for their meeting? Yeah, you can see it, right? They set this up on a radio program on Thursday. There was I didn't see any press release go out to the news media. I mean, they set this up with less than a week advance notice. And my understanding is it should be, I mean, I think they can legally do that, I guess. It's not a town meeting. It's this Hudson Park's meeting. But at this point, to wait until literally the last minute to set up a meeting less than a week in advance with no real media covering it. I didn't see anything in the Journal News. I didn't see anything in the Rockland County Times. It was only announced on Thursday. So are they really interested in having the public participate? It doesn't seem that way to me. But we do encourage people to go to the meeting on Wednesday. And to the town board meeting on Tuesday if you want to speak to the board during public input. I don't think there's anything on the agenda right now for this subject. Is everybody still there?
Yeah.
Make sure I didn't push the wrong button. Okay.
I mean, that's a good, as we go into the Q&A portion,
Right.
George, as people ask their questions, that it may be good to hear people's thoughts on what we can do to mobilize the issue and move things forward. Maybe people have ideas we haven't thought of yet. So maybe as you let people ask their questions that we may or may not have answers to, let's see if anyone has ideas on how we mobilize.
Right. I agree. Well, like I said, the last time we had this vote is you wouldn't sell your house if you didn't have a firm contract in place where you understood the terms. In this case, we don't even have a contract. We have a moving target called an MOU, which we went over some of the points on it. There are a number of points that won't be actually even answered until after the vote. So the vote is really giving the town complete authority to sell the property and pretty much do what it wants after the fact, including not sell the property. They can sell it, not sell it. They can make turns and changes in the terms of the MOU. It's too much variables, and I don't trust the board based on its performance so far, to even have that authority to do that with what we own. It's not their property, it's our property. And the supervisor comes out and says, well, we've learned our lesson from last year. We're going to give the people a chance to vote. Well, a vote on something we don't understand, that hasn't been defined, that we don't have a contract for. What are we voting on, really? I'm assuming we're voting on the content of the MOU at this point. But it's a yes or no vote on something we don't understand.
Actually, you are not voting on the MOU. You're voting on giving the supervisor and the town board the power based upon the MOU to negotiate the terms and conditions of the deal that
Right.
we'll know nothing about and sell the property. So it's a
Right.
misnomer that we're approving the MOU. The MOU is actually legally approved, right?
Well-
We're approving this vague term that went with the resolution approving the MOU and the ballot vote to give them power without the public. So I just want to make sure everyone understands that.
Right. And we're not
Right.
voting on the MOU because it can change. Go ahead. Greg, was that
Yeah.
your hand up?
Greg, do you have any ideas on how we could mobilize?
Yes, I do, Pete.
Good. Can we hear them?
Do you want to share with us?
I think this should be done in private. That's my 2 cents. I agree with what
Okay.
was commented on originally.
I
This should
think,
be a discussion amongst us and not shared with a
This
representative
is right. This is
of the
being
developer.
videotaped.
he's
Right.
gone.
And also this is being recorded, so we will be broadcasting this. So
Let's
we can save
try-
that for offline.
I mean, Greg, I don't want to cut you short, but we do know where to find you, Greg, and we know how valuable you are to a process like this. I really want to hear some of the other people, number one, other questions, so we make sure we get them on our list.
Yeah.
And number two, I do want to hear if anyone has an idea, and then we can mull those over along with the ideas you have, Greg, and Pete has, and everyone else. So does that work for everyone?
Yes.
Sure.
Greg, you okay with that?
Okay.
So George, why don't you open it up to some of the other people who would like to say something or ask questions, so everyone gets
Sure.
a chance.
Does
Yeah.
anybody else have any ideas or comments based on what you've heard so far, or some questions that you had that maybe we haven't raised?
Could I just say
Um,
my concern, and I posted it on the chat. So people have to understand what the vote is for, very clearly stated, as David has stated, so it can't be like in long narratives, whatever gets posted or whatever gets handed out to people. It has to be like bulleted, people read short statements. Secondly, I mean, maybe we need to put out there, you're putting everything in the hands of basically Jim Monahan.
right.
And I have nothing against police, but police people, I mean, does he have some sort of expertise in negotiating? Was he his lead negotiator for
Yeah.
his union or anything to that effect? Does he understand how to go, you know what I'm saying? So I do worry because, you know, just allowing this MOU and the allowing to enter a language in there about getting back money if they spend too much in building costs, I think it should be of great concern to everybody because he allowed that to go into an MOU, and that's crazy.
That's right. Yeah, he did it all by himself because basically he's the one that speaks for the board.
So there you go. Case in point right there.
Yeah. Well, transparency has been a big problem, and it continues to be on many levels, not just this issue. You know, we were hoping for more of an inclusive discussion after the vote down last year on the future of this property. But what happened is, you know, they gave, just so everybody understands, this what's called an overlay zone for this property. Some of you probably know, but it was amendments were made to it in 2019 for the benefit of Roger Moore, who was being queued up to purchase the property. And it included this high density housing. That was not part of the original plans for that property since the original overlay zone was done. So they amended it to allow Roger Moore to have this high density housing. So when Monahan says, we tried for 20 years to market this property and unsuccessfully, they didn't have this component with the high density assisted living, multifamily, and all that was not part of it. It was only put in last 2019. I'm sure there's a lot of developers out there that would love to build on this property, build the kind of housing that this is being proposed, but we're only taking part of what was in the overlay zone, the housing portion of it, and that's the part he's using. There's a lot of other parts. It has to do with business, it has to do with recreation, it has to do with a lot of other potential uses for that property that were part of the overlay zone that are not being included. It's just being focused on housing. And I said from the beginning, what is the benefit to us? Now people think, I had somebody at church mentioned to me, well, you know, I have my house and, you know, I may like to sell it and downsize. I mean, do they know what the cost of these units are going to be? Are they willing to sell their house for what is it, $500,000 or whatever we think that the value, do we know what the value of the selling price of these units are going to be? Maybe they're under a misconception that somehow they're going to sell their house and buy one of these units. I don't know. But it's not being fully explained, and it's not primarily for Stony Point. It's for anybody who wants to buy in. This is not an exclusive Stony Point community. You know, they're creating a community within Stony Point. Was the plan? Anybody know? Was the plan last year to put the recreation center on the town's Letchworth property, or was it going to always be on town park property where it's being planned now?
It was going to be, last year's plan, I believe, was to build it up near the garage that's across from the snack bar at the Little League field. I think it was supposed to be up in that general area. I'm not sure whether this one is exactly that same place or not, George, because, you know, this deal is less than that property that was in the lot that was carved out last year, that front lot. So this piece is a little smaller. So I don't know, Jim, do you know, did you read where?
Yeah, I actually know a little more about that. Raj, if we're getting back to Raj, he searched around for some place that he could build it cheap,
Where did you send the?
including a building up in Tompkins Cove that the school district controls that is full of asbestos.
Okay.
So
I got
dropped that one. They're
You got-
never, I don't think they
Right.
ever really had a firm site
Okay.
for that
All right.
center.
We'll talk
So,
after.
but maybe they have something more concrete now in terms of where they would put it. That's all.
I know it's a prefab. It's similar to, they compared it to the building that's down in Havasaur Village by the old high school, that type of building. They use that type of example of that rec center. So, you know, again, there's no details on what's in the interior,
Right.
where it's really going, all those things. So
It's far from a Butler building, the Havasaur building. It's quite substantial.
Right.
They do have a specific in the MOU not to exceed 10,000 square feet. So that's the
Right.
only thing in there really about the rec center on some tax parcel, you know, so there is some specific, but then again, this is a flexible MOU. So
That's it.
that doesn't mean
Flexible.
that's permanent.
I could flip through a couple of the slides here. This was the presentation that they made for the meeting that they didn't publicize. It's part of that video that I had recorded. Because he's an accomplished builder. I mean, he can obviously build stuff, I guess. You know,
Yes.
these are all
I just want
projects.
to point out, Jim, that's a great thing with the 10,000. Let me put in perspective what 10,000 feet is. A
Yep.
basketball court, just court, is 4,520 square feet. If you count the runoffs and the sidelines and the bench area, no stands, it's 7,290 feet.
Right. So we're talking about the size of a basketball court, a little bit more than that.
With some spectator stands, right? So
Yeah,
just so you all understand, that was one of the problems with Raj. Remember the
That was
famous
the
Raj
problem with
quote?
Raj.
Yeah.
Whether it was going to be whatever the number
Yeah.
of feet. But you know, I could build it bigger. I could make it 2 floors, 3. Well, this one doesn't even contain it has this definitive number that Jim just said. So you have to be careful of numbers that seem big but really aren't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So these are some of the maps that were part of their presentation. Which we want to talk about any of these. I guess the moving of the holes for the golf course is part of this, right?
Yeah. So if you're looking at the top of this map, my understanding is you can see where George just put this yellow thing goes across, but where the pond is, there's one hole. It's at the top of those black arrows. That hole will continue roughly to where the yellow overlay ends right now. And then it's going to be moved over to the right to create more property at the end for the builder. That property to the right wasn't used originally because it was wetlands and protected area. So I'm not quite sure how we shift this hole to something we couldn't build on in the first place. And then if you look down the bottom of the screen, you can see Row Hall. It looks like the U, the inverted U. The other piece, the other hole is right behind there. And again, they mentioned it, but I don't recall where that hole is going, but it's the hole right behind the building on the bottom there that's also being moved.
Oh, but the planning board will figure all this out, Dave. You know, the planning board I have no faith in at all. Is going to be doing the environment. Give me a break.
Let's give a last call to our guest here, because George put this together and we spread the word and people spread the word. Is there anyone else out here that has either a question we haven't raised so we get it on the list? I think that's very important, or has an idea how we go about mobilizing the town. Just be active with the project. I'm not going to say we need to mobilize them one way or the other, but we need to mobilize people to be active. Does anyone have input on either of those two items that's still on the call?
Yeah.
I think I don't know why at this moment with 31 days left that we're equivocating and ambiguous that we do not want this. And I just think if you're going to mobilize, you have to leave here with an idea that we are going to seek a no vote. You could list the reasons, and Pete gave his vision, but it's only one vision. Another vision might be what we've been striving for, and that really is having a really flesh out a master plan. And once you say that, everybody gets freaked out because that's actually really hard work, but it's over 30 freaking years old.
20,
the other thing is organizing isn't nice. It is oppositional forces meeting in order to gain a vote. And everybody bends over backward being so nice because this is who we are, as we said, as a group of 12. But somewhere along the line, we're going to have to become, I hate to use this word, political, and get the damn thing out there and say that we don't want it for all the good reasons that you say.
And all the unknown reasons that we haven't been answered too.
And Greg, just don't misunderstand me, Greg. I want the more people we get involved and know about the issue. My biggest fear right now is people don't know about the issue. And I'm going to throw something else out there. I believe, this is my own personal belief, that the reason the town spent town resources to negate the petitions for the library referendum were to get it off of this ballot, because the people who would come vote, and the library would have mobilized people to come vote, those people would have listened to presentations. In fact, they would have voted no on this referendum and yes on the library referendum. And the town did not want that referendum together with this referendum. And they used our money to go disallow that, go to court, fight to keep it off the ballot. All right, I just want people to understand that, right? And see the mentality.
I'm
we're
used to
dealing
that.
with. What?
There's precedent for that.
I know, but so my point of getting people involved, if we get people involved, even if they're in favor of it right now, but we get them involved, we get them knowing what's going on, we have a chance to sway them. We saw last year that we can sway some people, right? And you know, so right now my biggest fear is, like, some of us posted on Facebook, people will start, what, really,
Yeah,
what?
They don't know about it.
They don't know about it. So Greg, don't take me the wrong way. I'm certainly against it in its current way, shape, and form, especially with all the flaws and the unknowns. And I certainly would advocate against it, but getting people involved is part of the problem, because until we get a mass mobilization of people involved, nothing's going to change with the way the town is run. And this is a good example of how what we end up with.
Yep.
Mass mobilization is going to require articulating one side, and that side is against what they're proposing. So
Just based on the unknowns, Greg, alone, I'm not in favor of it. I mean, how can you agree with something you don't completely understand?
Then you should not put a question mark. Developing Letchworth, yes or no? I mean, you want to talk about introducing ambiguity, you always introduce ambiguity by raising a question rather than taking a position.
Well, I wanted to hear from people, whoever wants to be on the call. If they were in favor of it, I'd be happy to hear why. And the people that were questioning, at the same way. So I think it was a more opportunity to invite people into a conversation, which we should have had a while back, but that's fine. I'm happy with that.
Yeah, I know some
can make
people
their own decisions. I'm not here to tell them what to think.
I know some people have to run. I'm one of them that have to run.
Yeah.
I'm hoping for more opportunities. I'm hoping we do mobilize and focus on no, Greg, right? I mean, I think we do have to come up with some literature and some stuff, campaigns that are a vote no. I still want to hear from people. That's my big deal, right? I want to hear from people. Is there anyone else that has an idea or a suggestion or a concern we haven't heard yet?
Can I raise another point? You were going to have to raise $6,000 immediately, because $3,200 for one mailing, house to house. So when we're thinking about this for the next 31 days, we have to come up with money. Just a point of information. And that's the reason $6,000 is a viable amount.
Greg, I think we saw last time that United Stony Point United was a venue that people found to be good. Yeah.
Yeah, we had those meetings at the Patriot Hills. Yeah, their own meetings at Patriot Hills, not just the town's.
You're going to have to have that again. You're going to have a definitive, against meeting, where once we hear what they come out with Wednesday night, once we see if the town is going to have their own information system separate and apart from the builder, we are going to have at least one of those, like Greg put together last year, a definitive, these are the reasons no, right? And we'll have to figure out where that fits in. Like Greg points out, early voting is great, but early voting has some issues when you're trying to make a campaign against something, right? Because people start
starting
voting
in 16 days, 17 days from Wednesday. Well, I think we're kind of winding it down. I think I'd like to let people know that, Space sponsored this with the idea of inviting in conversation, and we'd welcome more people to participate. This will be videotaped. So if anyone would like to be on the list for future meetings or discussions about the subject, they can email stonypointer@optonline.net. And we certainly would encourage everyone to spread the word, as Dave and Pete and everyone was saying. So let your neighbors know, and certainly attend the meeting on Wednesday. I can put that flyer back up. Let's see. So we get more people to show up. Yeah. Sorry. So Wednesday at the clubhouse at the Letchworth. So we're hoping people can attend. This has not been a well-publicized meeting, so I don't know what we're going to have in terms of a turnout, but we might want to organize at least another Zoom meeting after that to sort of go over some of the issues that were raised and talk more about a plan of action. And we can do that with people who are interested in developing a plan of action to inform the people as a vote no against this project as it currently is being proposed, this purchase. Anyone else want to add to that? And we can conclude the Zoom call. Are we good?
Thanks.
Thank you for setting this up, George and Pete. I mean, appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you everybody for
guys.
attending, and
Thank you.
you all know different people, so spread the word. Thank you for participating and have a great rest of your weekend.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.